This week on the Communicators, a discussion on the role of states when it comes to privacy and the Internet. Our guest is Douglas Gansler, Maryland Attorney General and President of the National Association of Attorneys General.
Well, Doug Gansler is Attorney General of the state of Maryland. He is also the new president of the National Association of Attorneys General, and he is our guest this week on the Communicators. General Gansler, in your presidency of the NAAG, you chose online privacy as the issue you wanted to stress. Why did you choose that?
Well, each year the new president of NAG, National Association of Attorneys General, has a presidential initiative. So Rob McKenna of Washington State was our president last year. He picked human trafficking, a great issue, obviously underexposed, and it's important throughout the year to have a theme and expose the other 49 attorneys general to that issue. I thought that privacy in the digital age, privacy on the internet, was a critical issue as a bipartisan issue, and it affects everybody. Everybody, for the most part, is going to be on the internet, whether at their home or at the library or at work, and they're going to be buying and purchasing things and being susceptible to having their privacy rights infringed. Now, we don't look at it as we're going to indict the internet market or the providers. What we're doing is trying to have a conversation about where does the line between privacy and the legitimate business rights of the internet providers, where should that be drawn? And people will draw it in a different place, but we want to have that dialogue and make sure the consumers are protected in terms of their privacy, but that Google and other internet providers are able to conduct their business. Because most of what we do on the internet is free, to the consumer, but they certainly have a legitimate interest in advertising to us.
Why are you looking at that issue at the state attorneys general level?
Well, we've really become the de facto internet police, the Attorney General, at the Attorney General level. We've done a number of cases, whether it's with Craigslist, Backpage.com, MySpace, Facebook. We have interaction with them all the time because we are the protectors of the consumers, and the consumers are the people that are on the internet. The federal government is focused, as properly they should be, on terrorism and homeland security and those types of issues. Local DAs are very much focused on street crime, rape, robbery, and murder. And we've really let the internet providers sort of conduct themselves up until this point. And then we've started to take more of a regulatory role over the internet at the Attorney General level.
Well, I want to read an article from our guest reporter this week, and that's Juliana Grunwald of the National Journal. But in July, Ms. Grunwald wrote this article, and here's the first sentence. I want to get your reaction. When the Obama administration in February rolled out its approach to protecting consumer privacy online, it put as much emphasis on industry self-regulation as it did in its call for legislation to provide consumers with privacy protection.
And there is, the industry self-regulation component is essential to it, in the sense that it is the free market, and people will go to places where they're protected. I mean, look at eBay, for example. You buy a product, you're in Maryland, you buy a product in Oregon, and the person sends you that product, it is fraudulent. It's not good. First of all, who has jurisdiction to bring that case? The local DA, the Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney, and then, but for eBay, if people keep sending fraudulent products, then nobody's going to use eBay anymore. You're not going to pay the money to get the bad product. So they have an interest in regulating their own site to make sure that it works. The government also has an interest in regulating fraud that does occur. So I think it's a dual approach, but there are people who cut corners, and there's a lot of other interests that come in. And one of the issues we're working on, for example, is protection of intellectual property, American intellectual property. You go on Rosetta Stone, you want to learn how to speak French, you type in Rosetta Stone on the internet and on a Google search, and 4 of the 5 ads on the right side are for knockoff Rosetta Stone counterfeit companies in China. Now that we need to protect our consumers from that, because they're going to pay money for those products and they're not going to get what they paid for in return.
Juliana Grunwald.
Thank you, Mr. Gansler. Are you hearing from consumers that this is a concern, that privacy is a concern? Because one thing I've heard from a lot of companies is that, where's the harm? We don't see the consumer harm. But are you hearing from your constituents that this is a concern, this is something you need to be watching?
People are very, very concerned about privacy on the internet, and absolutely yes. When Google came out with their new policy, for example, their privacy policy, where they're going to look at your personal email accounts, your Gmail accounts, and then couple that with all other applications of Google on the internet, YouTube and Google Maps and so forth, and develop these very deep personal profiles on you, and then use that to laser focus their advertising to you, people have concerns about it. If they're looking at your Gmail accounts and looking for certain words and then going to send ads to your computer based on those words, it's not that dissimilar from somebody listening to your phone calls and then sending mail to your house based on the content of your calls. So people are concerned about privacy, but they're willing to compromise some of their privacy to have the access to the internet. So there's the question is whether the invasion of privacy is an appropriate one and an acceptable one. Just think about going on an airplane every day. So you go on an airplane, we now realize it's okay, we'll let our privacy be invaded by going through the metal detector. Now, because the end goal is to make sure the plane doesn't blow up. Now, when they put the new X-ray machines in, people are like, well, do I really want videos of me naked being seen by somebody? And now people are starting to be okay with it. There was some pushback. If they next said we're going to do strip searches of everybody before they get on the plane, that would probably be unacceptable. So consumers and people are willing to sacrifice some of their privacy for a bigger gain, i.e., being able to go on a computer and search for anything and get information at their fingertips for free, but perhaps not all of their privacy.
Do you favor do not track this idea of allowing consumers to opt out of having these targeted ads based on their personal preferences?
Yes, and so what we've seen as we've sort of been digging into this issue, talking to consumers, talking to different companies and different people, are two issues that really have sort of surfaced for us. One is the ability to opt out of this. I don't want to be searched. I don't want to be followed on the internet by this particular company. And second, transparency. What are they doing with my information? When you buy a product on the internet from some place that maybe has a brick and mortar facility or maybe doesn't, what are they doing with that information? How are they collecting it? How are they storing it? Are they protecting it from hackers? Are they protecting it from identity thieves? And to whom are they disseminating that information? Who are they selling that to, and for what purpose? That ought to be transparent, and you ought to be able to have an ability to opt out of that or not, but you can't opt out unless you know what it is they're going to do with the information.
Can this be done on a state-by-state level?
It can. We work most effectively collectively as attorneys general. I mean, picture the tobacco litigation, which sort of put Attorney General on the modern-day map, or most recently the mortgage foreclosure settlement, $26 billion involving all 50 states in the United States, where we're helping people get out of foreclosure. So when we work collectively, yes, we have that kind of impact. Internet companies like us to get together because they don't want to have 50 different regulations that they have to comply with. The federal government is much slower pretty much on everything in terms of regulation. So if something's going to get done, if something gets done by the federal government, everybody agrees it ought to be done. But we sort of push the envelope a little bit more on the regulatory side, only in this space because technology is being pushed much faster. So the laws are woefully behind where the technology is. I mean, I just worked on a bill this year in Maryland talking about email harassment, or electronic harassment. And the only way you could be accused of cyberbullying or get in trouble for harassing somebody electronically was by email. Now, how many kids and how many victims of cyberbullying are using email? And we had to update that to include social networking websites, text, and so forth. So the laws are that far behind the technology.
So is Maryland to have a specific or unique set of laws as opposed to the other 49 states?
No. No, they don't. And I mean, there are different laws regarding different issues. For example, that electronic harassment statute now looks probably different than it does in a number of other states, but the basic principle is the same. What we're trying to do through NAG is really not establish laws as much as have a dialogue of where should that line be. Where's the line between privacy ending and the legitimate business interests of the internet companies? Because there are very, very few things you're paying for on the internet without getting a product back. And so you can go on there and it's wonderful. And maybe you want relevant ads. Maybe you want ads that are about something. When you're Gmailing back and forth about your new the truck you just got and how you like to drive trucks, and now all of a sudden you start to get Chevy truck ads or Ford truck ads. That might be something you're much more interested in having than bicycle ads that you don't ride bikes. So there are people that are interested in that. You're going to get ads. That's going to happen because otherwise there's no incentive for the companies to be on the internet. So the question for them, and I guess for the consumer, is, are those ads relevant, and should they be relevant?
Well, Attorney General Gansler, you did mention Gmail. Back in February, you wrote a letter to Larry Page of Google requesting a meeting, and signed by 35 other AGs around the country because of their changes in privacy. Were you able to affect any change? Did you have that meeting?
We've had a number of meetings with Google, and they're ongoing, and we're working through this process. I mean, I got to say, it's been interesting because most of our interaction with the internet companies, the big ones in particular, have resulted in agreements. I don't even say settlements because they don't get to where we have to sue them and then we have to settle, though sometimes that does happen. Craigslist and some of the other cases. But mostly we come to an agreement as to what is appropriate. They've got 26-year-old kids in cubicles in San Francisco with ponytails saying, hey, look what I can do, how cool is this, by way of technology, but without really concern on how does that affect children and how does that affect the laws. So we've been able to meet with Google and talk to Google about their particular privacy policy. We haven't come to a final resolution that's ongoing. But with companies like Google that are basically monopolies, whether you can argue whether a monopoly in the legal sense, but they're certainly monopolies in the pedestrian sense. Everybody uses that for their search engine. Their interest in maintaining our privacy might be reduced, and so there's even bigger issues regarding privacy for the companies that really have a huge market share.
Juliana Grunwald.
Well, as I'm sure you're probably aware of, the Federal Trade Commission last week reached a settlement with Google over allegations that they violated a previous settlement last year on privacy, and Google agreed to pay a $22 million fine. Now, they had more than $40 billion in the bank at the end of 2011. Do you feel like Google's gotten off too easy? I mean, they've sort of come back several times before the Federal Trade Commission, over allegations of related to privacy. What's your view on that?
I wasn't involved in those negotiations, so I don't know whether it's a good settlement or a bad settlement. But it certainly sounds like they're going to get up the next day and go back to work. They're going to shake that right off. It's not going to drive them into bankruptcy, of course, but no one wants to drive them into bankruptcy. All we want to do is make sure, as we are in this. Look, Google was invented in 1999. So it's what. My math's not great, but we're about 13 years in to having Google even exist. And so what is appropriate for Google to do vis-a-vis the consumer is still being really fleshed out. And cases like that where they've been resolved are important. And I think we see that as important from the Attorney General level because we actually are able to, some of us are more active, Kamala Harris out in California being one. She started a whole privacy division within her office. She has the resources to do that, and she's doing a great job out there. But these are places that the companies worry about and need to worry about because we're representatives of the people. That's what we do. We are different attorneys general have different priorities, but we all are the consumer advocates. That's our bread and butter of what we do as attorneys general.
Would you favor federal privacy legislation? Would you like to see Congress pass something that covered the whole country and not a sort of a piecemeal state-by-state
approach? Would be
approach?
much better. Absolutely. If the federal government actually could, you ever watch C-SPAN or television? These guys can't, agree what day it is. So it's unlikely that the federal government, the people on Capitol Hill, would ever come to some sort of agreement that everybody, because all of a sudden it become political somehow. But really, people's privacy shouldn't be political. And where that line should be drawn would seemingly be best met at the federal level. And then we should and do have concurrent enforcement authority. The Consumer Protection Bureau, the Financial Protection Bureau with Rich Cordray, one of the former attorneys general, is also sort of getting into the space a little bit as well on the federal side. So there's going to be a lot of different people looking at these issues as it becomes more and more important. It was funny, when I actually I knew I was going to be president of NAG a couple years back. They have a little queue, I was the vice president, and so forth. I said, well, this would be a great issue because it affects everybody. It's bipartisan. It's something we need to kind of resolve. And someone said to me, well, don't worry. In 2 years, it'll be all fixed. It's going to be that you're going to have to pick a different issue. Well, it's really not. And we're really on the cusp of this issue. It's getting more and more important to consumers as they go on a map site, MapQuest, Google Maps, and map out their trip to their vacation next week. And the next time they're on the computer, they're starting to get ads for the bed and breakfast at that place and gas stations, stores from that place. It's like, whoa, that's spooky. And people want to know, what are they doing with that information? And how are they protecting it? And who are they giving it to? And so I think that's become a bigger issue, not a smaller one.
Do you support the Obama administration's sort of two-pronged approach? I mean, they say they favor, privacy legislation. They want Congress to pass a bill, but at the same time, they're launching these meetings to try to get industry's privacy codes of conduct.
Yeah, I think that's in fact the only way to go. I mean, I don't think this is an area where government should make all the rules. I think there's a huge role for industry, as they've been doing, to self-regulate. Facebook pays a lot of people a lot of money to make sure they're secure. Because if kids start getting taken out of their homes and people, the Facebook's compromised in any way, it hurts Facebook, and the next thing will happen. So they have an interest in it. So I think there needs to be regulation. It's not that dissimilar from the real world. I mean, the virtual world, in this sense, is the same. I mean, there's regulation, industry regulation, but there's also some governmental oversight, which I think needs to be part of it.
This is the Communicators, C-SPAN's weekly look at technology and public policy. This week, the Attorney General of Maryland, who is also the president of the National Association of Attorneys General, Douglas Gansler. Our guest reporter, Juliana Grunwald of the National Journal. You mentioned cyberbullying earlier and a couple other issues. What about for those under 18? Should there be special rules, special laws included when it comes to privacy?
Yeah, and when you talk about privacy, many different areas come under it. We've talked a little bit about data collection and dissemination, and then we talked about intellectual property protection. There's online payments on mobile devices. 5 years from now, we're not going to have wallets. We're going to be buying everything with our iPhone. We're going to turn on our car with our iPhone. We're not going to have car keys. And how is that information protected? Your financial information protected? Cyberbullying is one of those areas that comes under, in my view, privacy in the digital age. And yes, we should be looking at how to protect people under 18 in the cyberbullying context, in the social media context. I mean, that's all. The kids can't talk on the phone to each other anymore. They grunt. The way they communicate is through texting and social networks. And so we need to have certain rules for them. And then the issue that we've been really grappling with in the last few weeks and months is actually going lower than 18, which is 13. Right now, reasonable minds can differ on this issue, but Facebook has 7 million plus kids under 13 on it. How do they get on it? Their parents want them on it. They sign them in. And the kids are lying, and the parents are helping them lie to get onto the internet. To get onto Facebook. So you have 7 million kids, and that number is going to continue to grow because they're older brothers and sisters on it, and that's how they communicate with their friends, and that's this world. And so the question then is, do we try and work with Facebook to make it so they can't get on there, increase their technology somehow to really identify these kids quicker and earlier and sooner and kick them off? Or do we acknowledge that that's happening and say, but you need to have different privacy policies and privacy standards and privacy settings for kids under 13, and different people can advertise to those kids. So you ought to have, for example, the same standards you have on Sunday morning cartoons on television to the under 13 crowd. So, and be concerned with childhood obesity issues and that kind of thing. And so that's a really interesting debate, I think, at least, on how to resolve that.
But why is that your role or the government's role at some level to police whether or not kids can go on Facebook? Isn't that a parental role, just like watching TV?
The parents have a big role on social networks, but none of them really. Very few people know. Well, a lot more now do, but certainly not every parent knows how they work. Not every parent is privy to their child's Facebook account. And the government has a role because we're there to protect consumers. We're there to protect kids. And if 9-year-olds are on there and are susceptible to sexual predators and other people, we're the ones that have to go after them. And we prefer not to go after them. We prefer not to have sort of a fertile playground for sexual predators on Facebook. So, for example, if you're talking about kids under 13 being on there, how do you make sure that no one over 18 can contact them other than their parents or people designated by their parents? For example, their sports coaches or their teachers. But how far beyond that do you want to get? I would argue not very far, because then you get the problems that we had in the past. you talk about parents, it's interesting, in terms of privacy and other issues. The issue 5 years ago was sexual predators. When you're talking about social networking websites, there are a lot of kids who are getting taken out of the virtual world into the real world and being violated. You hear that happens still. You hear much fewer cases of it. There are very few cases of that anymore. And I would argue that's because parents really get that and talk to their kids about that and say, don't give any private information out to people you don't know and so forth. So I think education is absolutely an essential component of it, and parents have a huge role in this.
Are other issues when it comes to privacy and under 18 still major issues? And what's your experience been like in Maryland?
Yeah, I think the cyberbullying is real. And, people always think that's not going to happen to my kid. And it happens to your kid. And it's that, I think, is more and more of a problem because the bullier is hiding behind the anonymity of the internet. And so they said, well, there's always been bullies on the playground. True, but when the bully was on the playground, other people were able to see it, and you knew exactly who the bully was. Here, it's a little bit different, and I think that it's a contributor to the huge problem that we have with teenage suicide in the United States. And I think that the cyberbullying piece, I think, is pretty important issue for kids under 18.
And if you go to Doug Gansler's website, oag.md.us, you will find all sorts of information and resources for parents of children under 18. Juliana Grunwald.
As you are probably aware, Facebook has talked about possibly opening up their site to children 13 and younger. How do you think would that make the bullying situation worse? What's your take on that proposition?
Well, as I mentioned, I've actually spent an enormous amount of time talking to Facebook about this very issue and how and what makes sense and sort of the intellectual argument. Look, most people think that kids under 13 ought to be out in the streets playing, kick the can and spud like we did when we were young. And you'd rather not have kids sitting in front of the screens all day, whether it's PlayStation, Xbox, or Facebook. That said, there are 7 million kids on there. So the question is, and growing. So the question is how to protect them, how to make sure that it's okay that they're on there, and what are the parameters under which they operate on there. Is that going to enhance the amount of cyberbullying that goes on? Probably. But that's why we want to make sure that there are protections built in and that you are able to, that there are avenues to report the cyberbullying. And that's where parents, again, are going to, a little bit like the sexual predator stuff, parents, again, are going to have to educate their kids that, look, if something's inappropriate, if something makes you feel yucky or uncomfortable inside, you need to talk to us, your parents or a teacher or police or whoever you're comfortable talking to about this before it gets worse.
The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act is aimed at children under 13, and do you feel like that provides enough protection if say, if Facebook were to open to kids under 13? I mean, do you feel like there's enough protections in there?
No.
Okay.
And that, again, as I said earlier, when the federal government does it, it's going to be pretty vanilla. Okay. But I think that one of the insidious potential components of opening the Facebook up to kids under 13 is who is advertising to them. Who is the new market that is getting at them? Are fast food chains are going after them? Are sodas companies going after them? You really want to make sure that there are the advertising, because that's why they're doing this. They're making money out of this. Is really child appropriate, and I think that certainly is one of the components that needs to be added.
Mr. Gansler, I want to come back to one of Juliana's earlier questions to get more specifics. What would you like to see Congress do? What could they do best, in your view, to help attorneys general?
Well, I think there should be privacy policies that most companies now do have, should be very accessible, right out front, very easy to get, not having to go into dashboards and different levels of their site to then find something that's 30 pages long with small print and somewhere at the end saying, oh, by the way, every time you buy something, we're selling it to 35 other companies that are going to now direct market to you. So I think that the transparency needs to be a component of it, needs to be easily accessible and upfront. The opt-out or even opt-in ability, opt-in is a little bit ambitious, but the ability to opt out, I think, is essential. And so those are at least two of the components we'd like to see the federal government get involved in.
Well, didn't Microsoft just change their new policy on their new operating system to opt in?
Which is what you were saying earlier about sort of the industry component. Now, Microsoft can do that and say, hey, by the way, go to us because we have this, and no one else does. So I think that's a piece of where the industry side actually works. And yes, we congratulated them. We've talked to them. They told us about it ahead of time, and we're very appreciative of it. I think that's exactly where we ought to be going. Now, they could decide tomorrow to jettison that policy, but at least it's there now. And if you had a federal law that oversaw that encompassed that, it would probably be better.
What's your view on how the Obama administration has approached privacy online, the Justice Department, DHS, et cetera?
We've had positive dealings with the Justice on it, and the FTC and all the companies all the agencies are involved. There are a few of them, and I mentioned the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau because I think they're going to take a bigger and bigger role. I mean, Richard Cordray is not only smart, but he was an Attorney General and he gets it, and he's a consumer advocate. So I think they're going to be take a bigger role and hopefully be even more effective than some of the others. But we've had nothing but positive dealings with Justice and stuff. But the federal bureaucracy and the inertia that's inherent in the institutionalized way is much more difficult to break through. So they've been sort of supportive, but I think we've actually been driving a to the AG level.
Juliana Grunwald.
I wanted to shift focus here and talk about internet gambling. I know in your state there's been talk of possibly including online gambling as part of an effort to expand gambling in the state of Maryland. Where do you stand on that issue?
I haven't really taken a big stand on it one way or the other, but I think it's certainly dangerous. Most of the people are addicted. They get addicted to gambling. It's an addictive practice. You can lose a lot of money, and it tends to be done by younger people. It's not taxed, so it's sort of there's a lot of money being transacted without the government getting anything out of it. That said, there are a number of overseas gambling sites that people use, whether it's in Costa Rica or the Cayman Islands or elsewhere. So the reality is that it does exist. So I think that is certainly an area that the federal government would be best positioned to have regulations. If they're going to have online gambling, the federal government ought to be regulating it because most of it right now is international, so it's federal by definition.
Well, as you're probably aware of, the Justice Department last year reinterpreted the Wire Act to basically open the door to internet gambling by saying that the Wire Act only applies to sports betting, and so now you're seeing states starting to move on this issue. So it sounds like you believe that the federal government needs to step up here and clarify the law. Would you agree on that?
I do. I mean, I think that there's millions and millions and millions of dollars being bet over the internet all the time, gambled over the internet all the time, and that there's very, very little regulation. It's one of the areas, in fact, there's almost no regulation. It's one of the areas that the industry is, in the sense that there is an industry and there is regulating. So the ones where you actually get paid and that works, they're most of the business being driven to those particular sites. Could they decide to steal everybody's money one day? Yeah. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. Is
this an issue that NAG is looking into or
really
talked about? Or
not much. I mean, it's not an issue that NAG's really addressed much because it's kind of like immigration. I mean, there's nothing more federal than something that's coming from outside of our country into our country. So we've really, we kind of know where our bounds are and start and finish.
And one final question, another internet issue, which is something that's coming up in Congress, which is internet taxation. That might be coming back as law, it seems. What's your view from the state level on that?
Well, it's an issue that, it's not privacy. It's not a privacy issue, but it is an issue that has been talked about a great deal in every state because they're all strapped financially and thinking this is a great way of getting some revenue. I think that ultimately there's going to be taxation on the sales that occur over the internet. How it's done is this is definitely the devil's in the details. And is it going to be is it where you're sitting at your computer that's going to matter? Where the company is located, where's Amazon.com located? I mean, where are these places located, and to whom are they paying taxes? I think that's going to be the issue. I think that clearly they're going to tax internet sales, and it's hard to make the argument why they shouldn't, since they tax you when you go to the store and buy something. This is really not dissimilar.
Doug Gansler is the Attorney General of the state of Maryland and President of the National Association of Attorneys General. He's been our guest here on the Communicators along with Juliana Grunwald of National Journal.